Welcome, friends, to Rupert Reads. Today, we are going to continue reading The Adventures of Grandfather Frog by Thornton W Burgess, chapters 4 through 6. Chapter 4, Patience of Longlegs the Blue Heron. Patience often wins the day when overhaste has lost the way. If there is one virtue which Longlegs the Heron possesses above another, it is patience. Yes, sir, Longlegs certainly has got patience. He believes that if a thing is worth having, it is worth waiting for, and that if he waits long enough, he is sure to get it. Perhaps that is because he has been a fisherman all his life, and his father and his grandfather were fishermen. You know, a fisherman without patience rarely catches anything. Of course, Billy Mink and Little Joe Otter laugh at this and say that isn't so. But the truth is, they sometimes go hungry when they wouldn't if they had a little of the patience of Longlegs. Now, Grandfather Frog is another one who is very, very patient. He can sit still the longest time, waiting for something to come to him. Indeed, he can sit perfectly still so long, and Longlegs can stand perfectly still so long, that Jerry Muskrat and Billy Mink and Little Joe Otter have had many long disputes as to which one of the two kept still the longest. "You'll make a splendid breakfast," thought Longlegs, as very, very carefully he walked along the edge of the Smiling Pool so as to get right opposite Grandfather Frog. There he stopped and looked very hard at Grandfather Frog. Yes, he certainly must have been asleep, for his eyes were closed. Longlegs chuckled to himself right down inside without making a sound, and got ready to wade out so as to get within reach. Now all the time, Grandfather Frog was doing some quiet chuckling himself. You see, he wasn't asleep at all. He was just pretending to be asleep, and all the time he was watching Longlegs out of the corner of one of his big goggly eyes. Very, very slowly and carefully, so as not to make the teeniest, weeniest sound, Longlegs lifted one foot to wade out into the Smiling Pool. Grandfather Frog pretended to yawn and opened his big, goggly eyes. Longlegs stood on one foot without moving so much as a feather. Grandfather Frog yawned again, nodded as if he were too sleepy to keep awake, and half closed his eyes. Longlegs waited and waited. Then little by little, so slowly that if you had been there, you would hardly have seen him move. He drew his long neck down until his head rested on his shoulders. "I guess I must wait until he falls asleep again," said Longlegs to himself. But Grandfather Frog didn't go to sleep. He would nod, and then, just when Longlegs would make up his mind that this time he really was asleep, open would pop Grandfather Frog's eyes. So all the long morning, Longlegs stood on one foot without moving, watching and waiting, and growing hungrier and hungrier. And all that long morning, Grandfather Frog sat on his big green lily pad, pretending that he was oh so sleepy, and all the time having such a comfortable sun bath and rest, for very early he had a good breakfast of foolish green flies. Over in the bulrushes on the other side of the Smiling Pool, two little scamps in brown bathing suits waited and watched for the great fright that they had planned for Grandfather Frog, when they had sent Longlegs to try and catch him. They were Billy Mink and Little Joe Otter. At first, they laughed to themselves and nudged each other as they thought of the trick they had played. Then, as nothing happened, they began to grow tired and uneasy. You see, they do not possess patience. Finally, they gave up in disgust and stole away to find some more exciting sport. Grandfather Frog saw them go and chuckled harder than ever to himself. Chapter 5. Grandfather Frog jumps just in time. Back and forth, over the Green Meadow sailed Whitetails the Marsh Hawk. Like Longlegs the Blue Heron, he was hungry. His sharp eyes peered down among the grasses, looking for something to eat. But some good fairy seemed to have warned the very little people who lived there that Whitetail was out hunting. Perhaps it was one of Old Mother West Wind's children, the Merry Little Breezes. You know, they were always flittering and trying to do something a good turn. They loved to dance and romp and play from dawn to dusk the livelong day. But more than this, they loved to find a chance to do some favorite kind. Anyway, Little Mr. Greensnake seemed to know that Whitetail was out hunting and managed to keep out of sight. Danny Meadow Mouse wasn't to be found. Only a few foolish grasshoppers rewarded his patient search, and these only served to make him feel hungrier than ever. But old Whitetail had a great deal of persistence, and in spite of his bad luck, he kept at his hunting back and forth, until he had been all over the Green Meadows. At last he made up his mind that he was wasting time there. "I'll have a look over at the Smiling Pool, and if there's nothing there, I'll take a turn or two along the big river," thought he, and straightway started for the Smiling Pool. Long before he reached it, his keen eyes saw Longlegs the Blue Heron standing motionless on the edge of it, and he knew by the looks of Longlegs that he was watching something which he hoped to catch. "If it's a fish," thought Whitetail, "it will do me no good, for I am no fisherman. But if it's a frog, well, frogs are not as good eating as fat meadow mice, but they are very filling." With that, he hurried a little faster, and then he saw what Longlegs was watching so intently. It was, as you know, Grandfather Frog, sitting on his big green lily pad. Old Whitetail gave a sigh of satisfaction. Grandfather Frog certainly would be very filling indeed. Now, Longlegs the Blue Heron was so intently watching Grandfather Frog that he saw nothing else, and Grandfather Frog was so busy watching Longlegs that he quite forgot that there might be other dangers. Besides, his back was towards old Whitetail. Of course, Whitetail saw this, and it made him almost chuckle aloud. Ever so many times he had tried to catch Grandfather Frog, but always Grandfather Frog had seen him long before he could get near him. Now, with all his keen sight, old Whitetail had failed to see someone else who was sitting right in plain sight. He had failed because his mind was so full of Grandfather Frog and Longlegs that he forgot to look around as he usually does. Just skimming the tops of the bulrushes, he sailed swiftly out over the Smiling Pool and reached down with his great cruel claws to clutch Grandfather Frog, who sat there pretending to be asleep, but all the time watching Longlegs and deep down inside chuckling to think how he was fooling Longlegs. Slap! That was the tail of Jerry Muskrat hitting the water. Grandfather Frog knew what that meant. Danger! He didn't know what the danger was, and he didn't wait to find out. There would be time enough for that later. When Jerry Muskrat slapped the water with his tail that way, danger was very near indeed. With a frightened "Chug-rum," Grandfather Frog dived head first into the Smiling Pool, and so close was old Whitetail that the water was splashed right into his face. He clutched frantically with his great claws, but all he got was a piece of the big green lily pad on which Grandfather Frog had been sitting. And of course this was no use for an empty stomach. With a scream of disappointment and anger, he whirled in the air and made straight for Jerry Muskrat. But Jerry just laughed in the most provoking way and ducked under water. Chapter 6. Longlegs and Whitetail Quarrel. "You did it. I didn't. You did. Such a terrible fuss when Grandfather hid." You see, Longlegs the Blue Heron had stood very patient on one foot all the long morning, waiting for Grandfather Frog to go to sleep on his big green lily pad. He felt sure he was to have Grandfather Frog for his breakfast and lunch, for he had no breakfast, and it was now lunchtime. He was so hungry that it seemed to him that the sides of his stomach certainly would fall in, because there was nothing to hold them up. And then, without any warning at all, old Whitetail, the marsh hawk, had glided out across the Smiling Pool with his great claws stretched out to clutch Grandfather Frog, and Grandfather Frog had dived into the Smiling Pool with a great splash, just in the very nick of time. Now, if there is anything in the world so hard on the temper as to lose a good meal when you are very, very, very hungry, of course, Longlegs didn't really have that good meal, but he had thought that he was surely going to have it. So when Grandfather Frog splashed into the Smiling Pool, of course Longlegs lost his temper altogether. His yellow eyes seemed to grow even more yellow. "You robber! You thief!" he screamed harshly at old Whitetail. Now, old Whitetail was just as hungry as Longlegs, and he had come even nearer to catching Grandfather Frog. He was even quicker-tempered than Longlegs. He had whirled like a flash on Jerry Muskrat, but Jerry had just laughed in the most provoking manner and ducked under water. This made old Whitetail angrier than ever. And then, to be called bad names, robber and thief, it was more than any self-respecting hawk could stand. Yes, sir, it certainly was. He fairly shook with rage, and he turned in the air once more and made straight for Longlegs the Blue Heron. I'm no more robber and thief than you are, he shrieked. You frightened away my frog, screamed Longlegs. I didn't. You did. I didn't. It wasn't your frog, it was mine. Ja-rum, said Grandfather Frog to Jerry Muskrat as they peeped out from under some lily pads. I don't know. I belonged to anyone. I really didn't. Did you? No, replied Jerry, his eyes sparkling with excitement as he watched Longlegs and Whitetail. It's news to me. You're too lazy to hunt like honest people, taunted old Whitetail, as he wheeled about Longlegs, watching for a chance to strike with his great cruel claws. I'm too honest to take the food out of other people's mouths, retorted Longlegs, dancing around so as always to face Whitetail, one of his great broad wings held in front of him like a shield, and his long, strong bills ready to strike. Every feather on Whitetail's head was standing erect with rage, and he looked very fierce and terrible. At last he saw a chance, thought he did, and shot down, but all he got was a feather from the great wing which Longlegs kept out in front of him, and before he could get away, that long bill had struck him twice, so that he screamed with pain. So they fought and fought, till the ground was covered with feathers. They were too tired to fight any longer. Then, slowly and painfully, old Whitetails flew away over the great meadows, and with torn and ragged wings, Longlegs flew heavily down to the Laughing Brook towards the big river, and both were sore and stiff, and still hungry. Dear me, what a terrible thing, and how useless anger is, said Grandfather Frog as he climbed back on his big green lily pad in the warm sunshine. And that's the end of this read. If you liked what you heard, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. Thank you.